Her hands never measured anything. Not once. A woman named Elena, standing at her stove in San Antonio one weekday morning in 1972, could feed 8 people on $1's worth of pinto beans, a few dried anchos, and 2 onions. She didn't call that a hardship. She called that a Tuesday. That kitchen intelligence, passed down from abuela to mother to daughter across South Texas and East Los Angeles and the Rio Grande Valley, holds more wisdom than most of us ever stopped to learn. So hit subscribe, because this is for everyone who grew up watching those hands. Here are 25 Mexican meals your Barrio grandmother almost certainly made, and probably still makes today. Number 25. Fideo seco. The first thing that hits you when you walk into a Barrio kitchen is not what's on the stove. It's the smell of Fideo toasting in hot oil. Those thin vermicelli noodles turning amber in the pan before the tomatoes go in. Fideo seco was not a side dish in most South Texas households. It was dinner, the main event on a Wednesday night when there wasn't much else to work with. The cook would toast the dry pasta first in a thin layer of oil until each strand picked up color, then add pureed tomato and chicken broth and cover everything tight. By the time the liquid absorbed, the Fideo had this rich, almost smoky depth that no box of macaroni ever had. The dish came from Spain by way of Mexico City, but South Texas and East Los Angeles made it their own. Simple to make, cheap to stretch, and impossible to replicate from a can. Number 24. Papas con rajas, roasted poblano chiles and potatoes. That's the whole recipe, and yet it somehow tastes like a meal that took all afternoon. Your grandmother would hold the poblanos directly over the gas flame until the skin blistered and charred all around, then drop them in a bag to sweat before peeling. The long strips she cut from those chiles, the rajas, went into a pan with diced potato, onion, and sometimes a spoon of crema or a handful of Oaxacan cheese. Some families added corn off the cob. Some added a cracked egg right in the pan at the end. The beauty of papas con rajas is that it fills a plate without costing anything close to what a meat meal would. It was Barrio ingenuity, but it also happened to be delicious. In a lot of households across New Mexico and Arizona, this dish showed up on the table 2 or 3 nights a week through the 1960s and 1970s. Number 23. Arroz rojo. Ask any Mexican American over 60 what their grandmother's table always had, and arroz rojo is on the short list of guaranteed answers. The red rice that every Barrio cook made was nothing like the Spanish rice from a box. It started with long-grain white rice toasted in oil, just like the Fideo, until each grain turned opaque and faintly golden. Then came the blended tomato, the garlic, the cumin, and the broth. And the lid went on and the flame went low, and you did not lift that lid. Not once. The cardinal rule. Every abuela had a ratio she had memorized, a visual check for when the water was gone and the rice had risen, and she could tell by the steam alone. It served as a base under beans, a side to carne guisada, or a simple bowl with a spoonful of salsa on top when there wasn't much else around. Number 22. Caldillo de tomate. A thin tomato broth that smelled up the whole house and cost almost nothing to make. Caldillo de tomate was one of those quiet weeknight meals that shows up in practically every South Texas and Rio Grande Valley household memory from the 1950s onward. The base was blended tomatoes, onion, garlic, and dried chile de árbol, all simmered down in a little oil and then let out with water or broth. Into that broth went whatever was on hand, a few potatoes cut rough, a couple of eggs poached directly in the simmering liquid, or a handful of noodles. The eggs were the most common. They'd drop in whole, the whites setting in the orange broth while the yolk stayed soft, and you'd scoop one out with a big spoon and eat it over rice or tortillas. Kids loved it. It came together in under 20 minutes. Number 21. Nopales con huevo. Cactus was not exotic in the Barrio. It grew in the yard, sometimes in a clay pot on the porch, sometimes along the back fence where the land got dry. Nopales, the flat paddles of the prickly pear cactus, were cleaned of their spines with a careful knife, diced and dropped into a dry pan to let the sliminess cook out before anything else went in. That step took patience, and your grandmother had it. Once the liquid evaporated and the nopales looked dry and a little seared at the edges, she'd add onion, jalapeno, and beaten egg, and the whole thing scrambled together into a breakfast or a light dinner that was also deeply medicinal in the eyes of the family. Cactus was believed to help with blood sugar and digestion long before any official confirmation arrived. Nopales con huevo was a dish as old as the land itself, and in most Barrio households, it never left. Number 20. Machacado con huevo. In South Texas and along the border from Laredo to El Paso, there was a shelf in nearly every kitchen that held a small parcel of machacado, dried and shredded beef that had been salted and sun-dried in the old ranchero tradition. The word machacado comes from the verb machacar, to pound or crush, because the dried meat was traditionally beaten against a rock or a wooden board to shred it fine. A handful of that beef went into a hot cast iron pan with onion, tomato, and chile serrano, and when everything was fragrant, the eggs went in. The result was salty, savory, and deeply filling on a cold border morning. By the 1980s, commercially packaged machacado started appearing in grocery stores across San Antonio and the Rio Grande Valley, but the quality never quite matched what families dried themselves or bought fresh from the carniceria. Number 19. Tamales. No meal on this list carries more weight than tamales. Not for the flavor alone, though the flavor is reason enough, but for what they cost to make, who made them, and what it meant when a tray appeared on the table. Tamales were not a casual Tuesday dinner. They were a production, a 2-day event that started with the soaking of dried corn husks and the preparation of the masa, and involved every woman in the family who could be recruited, stationed around the kitchen table, or out on the back porch, each one with a job. One person spread masa onto husks with the back of a spoon in a smooth, practiced motion. One person spooned in the filling. Another folded and stacked the finished tamales upright in the big olla to steam. The whole operation might produce 200 tamales in a single session, enough to feed the family through the holidays and send bags home with everyone who helped. The filling varied by family and by region. Red chili pork was the standard across South Texas. Jalisco families sometimes used chicken in green salsa. Border households in El Paso leaned toward a drier red beef filling mixed with olives and raisins from the old Spanish colonial recipe. Rajas con queso for the vegetarians, sweet cinnamon raisin for the children. The masa itself was the art. Too dry and the tamale falls apart. Too wet and it never sets. The right consistency, what the experienced tamalera described as the texture of a thick paste that spreads without tearing the husk, came only from practice and from the feel of the dough under your palm. There were no measurements. There were no timers. There was only the knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations of women who stood at this same table and learned by doing. Today in December, across the Rio Grande Valley and in East Los Angeles and in Southside San Antonio, families still make them the same way. The production line has not changed. The argument about whether your family's masa is better than your aunt's has not changed either. Some things are not lost. Some things are just Tuesday in December. Number 18. Flautas de papa. Before the taqueria made flautas a menu item, they were a home kitchen staple built around the most affordable filling a family could find: mashed potato. The corn tortilla would be warmed on the comal until it was pliable, not crispy, and then a spoon of seasoned potato, sometimes with a little chorizo mixed in, went down the center before the whole thing got rolled tight and placed seam side down in a pan of hot oil. They had to be held in place for the first minute or they'd unroll in the oil. Most cooks used tongs. Some used a wooden spoon laid across the row of flautas in the pan. Once golden and stiff, they came out onto a paper bag and were stacked on a plate with crema, salsa verde, shredded cabbage, and a slice of lime. They were the dish a mother made on Friday afternoon when she had 6 or 7 kids to feed and not much in the refrigerator. Cheap, fast, and good enough that the kids forgot to notice there was no meat. Number 17. Albondigas. The meatball soup of the Barrio was a whole different thing from what you might expect. Albondigas started with ground beef, or a mix of ground beef and pork, worked together with rice, fresh mint, and egg until it became a loose, fragrant dough that the cook shaped into golf ball-sized rounds. The rice was raw when it went in. It cooked inside the meatball as the albondiga simmered in the broth, expanding and lightening the texture, so each meatball had a gentle, almost fluffy give when you bit into it. The broth was built from tomato, onion, and chile colorado, a deep red soup that clouded and thickened as the meatballs released their starch. Zucchini and potato went in toward the end, cut large so they'd hold their shape. The mint was the tell. It was the ingredient that separated a proper albondiga from a generic meatball, and the families who grew up eating them recognized the smell the moment the soup started simmering. Leave a comment if your abuela put mint in hers. Number 16. Gorditas de maiz. A gordita is just what the name says, a little fat one, a thick round of masa formed by hand, the size of a palm. In the 1960s and 1970s in Texas and throughout the border region, gorditas were made fresh every morning on the comal without any additional equipment. You pressed the masa round thick, cooked it until it dried and firmed and got a little color on both sides, then split it open at the edge and stuffed it with beans, potatoes, chicharron in salsa verde, or picadillo. The pocket held the filling close and the masa soaked up the juice. They were filling in the way that corn masa is always filling, slow to digest, heavy in the stomach, the kind of meal that held you from breakfast until well past noon. Store-bought corn tortillas and the rise of fast casual Mexican restaurants in the 1980s pushed gorditas off the home breakfast table in many families, but the women who knew how to make them never stopped. Number 15. Atole. Long before protein shakes and smoothies, the Barrio had atole. It was a warm, thick drink made from masa harina dissolved in water or milk, sweetened with piloncillo, and flavored with cinnamon. In cold months, it came out as the first thing in the morning, steaming in a clay mug before the tortillas hit the comal. Some families added chocolate and called it champurrado. Others kept it plain and pale. Along the border, it was also the drink given to sick children and to elderly family members who couldn't manage a full meal. The piloncillo gave it a raw, molasses-edge sweetness that granulated sugar never replicated, and the masa thickened the liquid into something you could almost eat with a spoon. Atole was not brunch, it was fuel, practical and warming in the way that a generation raised without central heating understood warmth, something you drank and felt in your chest. Number 14. Pozole. There are arguments in Mexican-American families about pozole the way there are arguments about tamale masa and arroz rojo ratios. Those arguments have been happening for decades and they are not going to stop. Red or green or white, pork or chicken, thin broth or thick, oregano dried and crumbled or kept whole, shredded cabbage on top or just tostadas and lime. Pozole is the dish that shows you where a family is from and who taught them to cook, because the regional differences are real and significant, and every family believes they have the right version. What most pozole has in common, across all the regions and all the arguments, is the hominy. Maiz cacahuazintle, a large kernel corn treated with slaked lime in the process called nixtamalization, was transformed by that process into the bloomed, chewy, slightly funky kernels that turned pozole into something unlike any other soup on earth. The bloomed corn was not an accident. It was a deliberate technology developed long before European contact, and the Nahuatl word pozole, meaning foamy water, refers to the way those kernels foam and bloom as they cook. In the Barrio kitchen of the 1960s and 1970s, making pozole meant starting the day before. The dried hominy soaked overnight in a big clay olla. The pork neck bones, or the whole pork shoulder if there was money for it, went into cold water with onion, garlic, and salt and simmered for hours until the meat pulled from the bone with no resistance. The dried guajillo and ancho chiles for the red version were toasted on the comal until fragrant, then soaked and blended into a thick paste that colored the broth a deep brick red. Pozole was not a weeknight meal. It was a weekend production, a Sunday meal, the dish that appeared at baptisms and funerals and quinceañera prep days, when the women of the family gathered to work and eat together. Today in the Rio Grande Valley and in Southside San Antonio and in the colonias outside Tucson, pozole still appears on Sunday morning tables beside a plate of tostadas and a bowl of dried oregano. It is not gone. It was never going to go anywhere. Number 13. Capirotada. Lent brought capirotada to the table every Friday. A sweet bread pudding built from pan blanco that had gone slightly stale, soaked in a syrup of piloncillo, cinnamon, cloves, and tomato, which sounds wrong but tastes exactly right. The tomato cut the sweetness and gave the syrup a faint savory base that balanced the sugar and the spice. On top went raisins, peanuts, shredded coconut, and sliced banana, and then the whole thing baked in the oven until it set into a warm, custardy slab that smelled like every Lent you ever survived as a child. The symbolism was not subtle. Each ingredient carried a meaning rooted in the season, and whether or not anyone at the table thought about that while eating, the capirotada still tasted like a kind of grace. Sweet and heavy and impossible to stop at one piece. Families across Jalisco and South Texas had versions that differed by what went on top, but the piloncillo syrup was always constant. Number 12. Chilaquiles rojos. Sunday morning in the Barrio meant one of two things on the stove: menudo or chilaquiles, and whoever got there first decided which one it was. Chilaquiles rojo started with yesterday's tortillas, torn or cut into rough quarters and fried until they went stiff, then dropped into a pan of simmering red salsa made from dried guajillo and a tomato or two blended together. The trick was the timing. You pulled the chips off the heat the moment they softened, but before they turned completely limp, so each piece had a little chew, but still soaked the salsa into its surface. On top went crema, fresh cotija, sliced onion, and sometimes a fried egg placed whole in the center of the plate. In Guadalajara-influenced households across California, chicken was shredded into the chilaquiles at the final stir. The dish used up what was already there and tasted like something you had made a deliberate effort to produce. That was the genius of it. Number 11. Bunuelos. There was a sound to Christmas time in the Barrio, and it was the sound of bunuelos hitting hot oil. The flat, paper-thin rounds of dough stretched wide as a dinner plate and fried in a deep pan of lard until they blistered and crisped, were then drained and stacked on the table where the children waited to dust them with cinnamon sugar and break them into shards. Making bunuelos was an event. The dough rested, the rolling was a skill, and frying a paper-thin round without letting it fold and crumple in the oil required a practiced hand and the right temperature. Families who made bunuelos every Christmas usually had one designated fryer, the person who knew when the oil was ready by the way a tiny drop of dough behaved when dropped in, not by any thermometer. The finished bunuelo was not filling. It was pure pleasure, crunchy, sweet, warm, and gone in 4 bites. Number 10. Menudo. No dish in the Barrio carried more reputation than menudo, the tripe and hominy soup that was simultaneously the cure for everything that ailed you and the meal that separated those who were raised on it from everyone else. Menudo was not fast food. It simmered for hours, the honeycomb tripe cut into bite-sized pieces and cooked until tender in a red broth built from dried ancho and guajillo chilies, oregano, and hominy. The smell that came out of the pot during those hours was significant, and your grandmother did not apologize for it. By Sunday morning, the soup was ready, and the table went out with bowls of dried oregano, crushed red chile, diced white onion, lime, and a stack of fresh corn tortillas. Menudo was believed to cure a hangover, settle a stomach, and put strength back into the body after illness. And whether the medicine was in the tripe or in the ritual of sitting down surrounded by family is a question nobody in the Barrio ever bothered to separate. Number 9. Papas con chorizo. Mexican chorizo is not Spanish chorizo, and if your abuela saw a video use the wrong one, you heard about it. Mexican chorizo was fresh, loose, red with dried chile and vinegar, and it came out of the casing and straight into the pan where it broke apart and fried in its own fat. Once the chorizo had crisped and rendered, the diced potatoes went in to cook in that fat and absorbed the red chili color until they were golden and just a little crispy at the edges. The combination was a breakfast staple throughout the 1960s and 1970s across Texas and California, scooped into warm flour tortillas or piled onto a plate beside refried beans. Chorizo and potato was also the default taco filling at every quinceañera breakfast, every church fundraiser, and every early morning family gathering, where someone had to feed 20 people before 9 in the morning. It cost almost nothing, and it fed everyone. Number 8. Calabacitas con queso. Summer in the Southwest meant summer squash, and in the Barrio that meant calabacitas. The word just means little squash, and the dish was whatever your grandmother grew or found cheap at the mercado that week. Zucchini, yellow squash, or the pale gray-green Mexican squash that showed up in border markets from June through September. It went into the pan with corn cut fresh off the cob, diced tomato, onion, and green chile, and cooked down until everything softened together and the corn released its starch and the whole dish got creamy without any added dairy. Then came the cheese, usually Chihuahua cheese or Monterey Jack, melted over the top. Some families stirred it in. Some put the pan under the broiler for a minute to get a little color on top. It went with everything, and it cost almost nothing when the squash came from the garden, which it usually did. Number 7. Enchiladas de chile colorado. There are enchiladas you order at a restaurant, and there are enchiladas your grandmother made, and these are not the same dish. The restaurant version begins with a can. Your grandmother's version began the night before, when the dried chili pods, whole dried reds from the ristra on the back porch, went into a bowl of warm water to soak overnight. By morning, the rehydrated chilies went into the blender with garlic, cumin, and a cup of the soaking water, and the resulting sauce was strained through a sieve and fried in a thin film of oil in a wide pan to deepen the flavor. That step, frying the blended chili paste before adding liquid, was what separated a flat sauce from a real one. Each corn tortilla got dipped in the chili sauce, draped over a flat surface, filled with a spoon of shredded beef or crumbled white cheese, and rolled or folded flat on the plate. The sauce went over the top, then the cheese. Then the pan went into the oven for just a few minutes, long enough to melt the cheese and let the sauce bubble at the edges. A slice of white onion and a handful of shredded lettuce on the side. The technique of dipping each tortilla in the sauce before filling was the key, and it was the technique that most people who grew up making enchiladas at home learned by watching and never by reading a recipe. The method passed by hand, tortilla to tortilla, one generation to the next. Number 6. Picadillo con papas. Ground beef stretched with potatoes was one of the great equalizers of the Barrio kitchen. Picadillo meant different things in different households and different regions. In South Texas, it was seasoned with cumin and chili powder and tomato, and the diced potato went in early so it could absorb the spiced oil the beef cooked in. In California, families with Jalisco roots, picadillo sometimes included raisins and green olives in the older colonial style. In New Mexico, it leaned on green chili instead of red. Whatever the regional variation, the base logic was the same. A small amount of meat, extended with a cheap starch, seasoned well enough that nobody missed the extra protein. Picadillo con papas filled tacos, burritos, tamales, and gorditas. It topped a plate of rice. It went into a pot of beans for the last bit of cooking. It was the most versatile thing a Barrio cook had in the rotation, and it tasted better the second day. Number 5. Caldo de res. The beef bone soup your grandmother made on Saturday morning smelled like the whole week was going to be okay. Caldo de res started with bones, marrow bones, and knuckle bones that the carniceria gave away cheap or included with other cuts, added to a large pot of cold water with onion, garlic, and dried chile de árbol. They came to a slow boil, and the cook skimmed the foam that rose from the bones in the first 30 minutes, a patient and necessary step that kept the broth clear and clean. Once the broth was going, in went the vegetables: corn cut into wheels, zucchini quartered long, carrot, chayote, cabbage, and potato. By the time everything was tender, the marrow had gone soft inside the bones and was meant to be pushed out with a spoon and eaten on a tortilla with a little lime and salt. That was the cook's prize, the first bowl, eaten before anyone else was called to the table. Number 4. Arroz con leche. Sweet rice pudding was not a weekend dessert in most Barrio households. It appeared on a Tuesday when there was plain rice, a can of evaporated milk, and some cinnamon left in the jar. Arroz con leche came together in one pot. The rice went in with water and a cinnamon stick until cooked through. Then the milk came in, and sometimes a little sweetened condensed milk for richness, and the whole thing simmered on low heat until it thickened into a creamy, fragrant pudding. It was served warm in the winter and cold and loose in the summer, ladled into cups or bowls and dusted with ground cinnamon on top. It fed a table of children with no effort and no expense. Your grandmother knew that a pot of arroz con leche kept kids from complaining until dinner was ready, and she was not wrong. Number 3. Tortillas de harina. Fresh flour tortillas from a Barrio kitchen did not look like the ones in plastic bags at the grocery store. They were thicker in places and thinner in others, slightly irregular at the edges where the rolling pin had gone a little long, with dark brown spots on one side from the dry comal, and a puff of steam that rose off the surface when you folded them in half, right out of the pan. The smell was lard and flour and heat. The dough was flour, lard or shortening, salt, baking powder, and warm water, worked by hand until it came smooth and then rested covered with a dishcloth for 20 minutes before portioning. Each ball went under the rolling pin on a lightly floured surface. The comal was hot, not scorching. 45 seconds on the first side, flip, 30 seconds more. Then folded and stacked in a clean cloth towel to stay warm and soft, while the next one went down. There was no faster path from nothing to something in the Barrio kitchen. Number 2. Frijoles de olla. Everything else on this list was cooked by women who knew how to use frijoles de olla as a foundation. The pot of beans, pinto or black or bayo depending on the family's home region, simmered on the back burner for hours with a half onion, a couple of garlic cloves, and sometimes an epazote sprig for digestion. Nothing else. The seasoning came only at the end, salt added late so the skins stayed tender. The beans absorbed the flavor of the pot itself, the clay olla that generations of families preferred because it held heat evenly and gave the liquid a depth that a stainless pan never could. Frijoles de olla was the meal when there was no meal, the side dish at every other meal, the filling for tacos on the nights when meat ran out, and the base layer underneath everything the Barrio kitchen ever built. No grandmother from the Barrio ever ran out of beans on purpose. The pot was always on. Number 1. Caldo de pollo. Your grandmother's chicken broth was not a base. It was the meal. The whole stewing hen, older and tougher than a supermarket fryer and far more flavorful, went into a large pot of cold water with half an onion, a split head of garlic, and 2 dried chilies. It simmered for hours at a barely there bubble until the broth went golden and the house filled with a smell you have never replicated anywhere and probably never will. The vegetables came in for the last 45 minutes. Carrot, potato, chayote, zucchini, corn cut into wheels. The chicken meat pulled from the bone in loose, tender shreds. Every bowl got a handful of cilantro, a squeeze of lime, and a warm tortilla alongside. Caldo de pollo was the meal your grandmother made when someone was sick, when someone was grieving, when the weather turned cold, or when she wanted to give people the thing she knew best. There is no recipe for that last part. That came only from her. Those are 25 meals that came out of Barrio kitchens across South Texas, East Los Angeles, the Rio Grande Valley, and every patch of the Southwest where Mexican women cooked without measuring and fed families without being asked. None of these dishes needed a restaurant. None of them needed a trend. They just needed someone who knew what she was doing, standing over a stove. Tell us in the comments, which one of these did your family make? And do you still cook it today? We want to hear the stories. If you enjoyed this, share it with someone who grew up on this food. Like the video, hit subscribe, because we have more coming that will take you right back to those kitchens. Until next time, buen provecho.